All right, everybody. It says I'm live, so please let me know in the chat if you can hear me and see me because only one of those is actually really important, but I want to make sure we're having a good time. It is good to see everybody tonight. Welcome to another Morocco Monday, as we so lovingly like to call it. We've got Durgan in the house. Fish Sticks is here as well. We have John P., Sean Samuels. We got Don of Nahil. We got Lefty GR. All the good people are here tonight. Thank you all so much for being here. Chrissy Nemo says 30 at 6, and I will say that that is totally fine. So, welcome everybody. And yes, some things happened while we were all distracted, and that's what this live stream is about. Especially if you're catching it here on the replay. Just so you know, we're going to go over a lot of the different events that occurred during that period of distraction, right? Because a lot of people were paying extreme attention to one particular item, but not necessarily anything else happening at that time. So I felt like it would be good for us to go around and discuss some of the things that occurred and then be aware of other threats we might actually need to be more prepared for based on their proximity. Okay, so you'll see what I mean by that here very soon. We're also going to talk about some of the things that have happened here in the United States regarding just economic indicators and hardships to come. So those are things that we also need to discuss. So Andrew Valenta says you can 1R1 faster than me. Yeah, but can you 1R3 as fast as I can? I don't know. We have to find out. Anyway, I want everybody here to just be aware of the fact that we are in a very tumultuous period, right? We have been for quite some time, but it does seem that let's just call it, the fire is starting to ignite or even get higher, right? We know things are getting a little bit closer to the danger zone, which I do enjoy my Kenny Loggins from time to time. So let's talk about some of the things that have been going on. Now, this was something that maybe not everybody caught wind of right away, or maybe you had no idea about it. Like I said, with the balloon situation that was occurring, we were all paying a lot of attention to that, and rightfully so, because it was a very interesting situation that was dangerous in one form or another, no matter how you want to look at it. And it also was kind of revealing in the sense of how our military and our government would be handling things in the future if there was another similar scenario to occur. So these are a lot of things we can learn from, but some things slipped under the radar during that period that I will help you connect the dots with as to why we should be paying attention. There's more to this equation than just face value, as usual, which is what I try to deconstruct for everybody while I can, or during these conversations. So, what first occurred? Well, back on February 2nd, we had the Biden administration actually transfer someone out of Guantanamo Bay. And this is something that we can discuss so that you can get an understanding as to why I'm actually touching base on this, because just it's not just like, oh, why are they getting people out of Guantanamo? And regardless of like Guantanamo itself, right? This is something I just want everyone to consider. Okay, so keep this in mind. Shed out. I'll do my best. Okay, no promises, but I'm doing my very best. I promise. Okay, so Biden administration transfers a Guantanamo detainee to Belize. So Belize, in case you're not aware, is in Central America, and there's reasons why that matters here that we'll talk about in just a second. Okay, Mahid Khan, a Pakistani citizen and Guantanamo's only known legal U.S. resident, arrived in Belize on Thursday. 2 more detainees could leave the facility in Cuba soon. Now, are there people wrongfully detained in Guantanamo Bay? I don't know. I don't know any of the details when it comes to what got these people there other than what's reported, right? So we only know what we're told when it comes to the people who are detained within Guantanamo Bay. And of course, it has a very shady history and it's tied to things like the Patriot Act. So there's a lot of things surrounding Guantanamo Bay that you can or may not disagree with. I don't know. You have to figure that out for yourself, right? But this is just the information I want to share with you because it actually is applicable to possible threats here in the United States in the relative future, okay? The Biden administration transferred a detainee from the detention facility at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba on Thursday and is preparing to transfer at least 2 more in the coming weeks, according to 2 senior U.S. officials and a former senior administration official. Okay, now, why does this matter? Well, first off, this person is being transferred to Belize. Okay, so they're still in our general vicinity, right? And we know that basically everybody who's in Guantanamo has either been guilty or at least accused of participating in some type of attack or planning, or even when it comes to support, whatever else it might be, right? We know exactly why people are there, regardless of whether or not they actually were guilty or not. I mean, we just don't know, right? So either way, okay. A Pakistani citizen and Guantanamo's only known legal U.S. resident, Khan was granted asylum while attending high school near Baltimore in 1998. He returned to Pakistan in 2002, and according to a Defense Department DTT assessment, joined al-Qaeda and became a direct subordinate to Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, often known as KSM, al-Qaeda's senior operational planner and the principal architect of the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, which I don't know if I can even say that at this point, but I don't know anything anymore when it comes to being on YouTube, apparently, but we're just reading a news article, okay? KSM, according to the U.S. documents, tasked Khan with delivering money and transporting another senior al-Qaeda figure to carry out a deadly attack on the Marriott Hotel in Jakarta, Indonesia in August 2003. KSM intended to use Khan to attack U.S. gas stations and water reservoirs, the U.S. alleges, okay? So this person has a history of possible involvement with attacks here on U.S. soil, not just in places in other parts of the world. So these are all things we have to keep in mind when we're discussing this situation. This happened this past week while we were all distracted. And of course, transferring people out of Guantanamo Bay, whatever implications that has would sound some alarms, I'm sure. Okay. Now, let's see here. I'm getting some information here. Oh, Northern Girl Hobbies, thank you for being here and modding. I appreciate it. So listen, that wasn't necessarily the main brunt of the story, but we do know that people that have a dangerous past, or at least links to people with a dangerous past, are being let out. And then they're not being necessarily transferred or anything along those lines. They're being let go, but then they're being let go in places like Belize. And why does that matter? Well, what I would assume is that from Belize, you can make your way up to cross over the southern border relatively easily, because we know that a lot of people seem to do that on like a daily basis, right? So, especially nowadays, well, what also just recently happened on February 1st, okay? Iranian illegal immigrant caught at border not on terror watch list after further vetting, DHS official. Now, here's where that twist comes into play, because obviously people getting caught at the border that are tied to countries that we are basically in a proxy conflict with right this second, that may or may not be involved in something regarding attacks here on U.S. soil, it would probably be in our Defense Department's best interest to not let everyone assume that these things are actually happening. So you have to keep these things in mind when we read through these articles, because you're going to see why here in just a second. But let's go ahead and talk about it, okay? Texas law enforcement arrested an Iranian illegal immigrant at the southern border last week whose name and date of birth were initially flagged as a match on the FBI's terror watch list, but who, a DHS official tells Fox News, was ultimately determined not to be a match on the database after further vetting. Texas Department of Public Safety arrested 29-year-old Alireza Hadari last week after a traffic stop involving a human smuggler at the border in Valverde County, Texas, as part of Operation Lone Star. Hadari was being smuggled in the vehicle along with 4 other illegal immigrants. He was located in the trunk. Fox is told that Hadari was handed over to Border Patrol custody and later determined to be a match on the FBI's terrorist screening database. So at first, this guy is a match, and he's crossing the border illegally, which easily could happen for anyone who might be in Belize or any other Central American country. But moving on from there, Fox reached out to the Department of Homeland Security, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and Customs and Border Protection on Thursday and multiple times since. Only on Tuesday did DHS refer Fox to the FBI, which declined to comment. The FBI's website says it does not confirm anyone's status on the watch list. However, on Wednesday, a DHS official told Fox News that after further vetting, Homeland Security officials determined that Hadari was not a match on the TSDB. Now, keep in mind that the reason I brought this to your attention was because, well, first off, the FBI is saying, well, we're not going to confirm it, yes or no, anyway. So I find that to be interesting, considering that the Department of Homeland Security seems to have no issue confirming it one way or the other either way, right? So I'm not really sure how that disconnect occurs, but we know that initially it was told to the law enforcement involved with the arrest of this person that they were in fact on this watch list, okay? Either way, here's what I wanted you to kind of take away from that scenario. Just in the last week, while all this was happening in the sky, we had people who had a history of planning attacks here on U.S. soil, especially on gas stations and water reservoirs, which sounds strangely familiar when you talk about infrastructure attacks, released from Guantanamo Bay and released into Central America. And then within the same time period, we had an Iranian illegal immigrant arrested at the border who was at least initially flagged to be on the terror watch list. So even if that person was mistakenly flagged, what we're seeing and what we should be very cognitive of, and I know many of you already are, is the fact that people with these types of intents can get in through the southern border relatively easily. And in fact, some of the people involved with getting people across the border are probably involved with some of the countries that these people are from, if you understand what I'm trying to say. So this is a major security blunder as well. And what you have to keep in mind is that we can all see the balloon, right? We can all see that in the sky, and we can talk about it on the news for an entire weeks long cycle. But we don't necessarily see the, let's just say, more extreme type of person coming across the southern border. And then we also don't necessarily see how they're being handled afterward, right? So keep that in mind, because as much as that balloon was indeed a security issue, and obviously we all have a lot of strong opinions as to how that was handled or not handled, or however you want to look at it, there are other threats coming into the country in even a more low-key way that are likely even more threatening in many ways. And I'll get into that at another point in time, but there is some research in the work as to why some of these things are probably connected and why we should be concerned about what's already here in the country versus just what's up in the sky, okay? Because as dangerous as these balloons could be, especially with whatever they might be able to carry in the sense of cargo, there's a lot of dangers already on the ground here in the United States, and that's just how it is. And there's going to be, we'll talk about that more here in the future when I have a better, more detailed understanding as to what that truly means. That way I can present it in a way that actually makes sense with good verification applied, okay? Now, let's see here. All right. Sharon Ann Menifee says, yep, we the people with our heads on a swivel and God in our hearts. Yeah, heads on a swivel is very important right now. And of course, maintaining your faith is good if that's what helps motivate you to keep moving forward, which I know for many, many people here in the community, that's exactly what it does. And honestly, with how dangerous things are becoming and with how just tumultuous the world is at this point in time, we all need faith and hope, and we need to look forward, because we don't want to just get bogged down by all this negativity, and understand that, as a parent, it is hard to kind of see some of this stuff happening and go, what's next, right? Because it's not something you necessarily want to anticipate for your children, but you also have to be realistic about just where the world is at this point in time. And throughout human history, people have not had the ability to just decide that their children won't be faced with stressful times, right? It has happened to just about every generation. So it is just part of the deal, unfortunately. Now, let's see. I did see somebody, Gen X Gemini says, hi, Magic. And I said hello to you as well. Just so everybody knows, we are going to keep moving forward here in some of the things regarding what's happened during this past week. But I do want everyone to understand that I appreciate all of you being here, and that networking and community is a big part of what we need to be doing, because honestly, everybody could use a helping hand if things really do fall apart. And I can't do everything on my own. I just can't. I'm not a mechanic. I'm not a doctor. I'm not an electrician. In all honesty, I'm not a lot of things. I'm a guy who tries to be relatively well-rounded, but by being well-rounded, I'm not the most, I guess, capable expert in any one particular thing. So maybe that makes me less valuable. I'm not sure. But that's why I'm trying to surround myself with people who are valuable, that can actually help me develop and maybe even learn some of their skills from them directly. So I'm doing what I can with what I have, and I hope all of you are doing the same. Here's a link to the Discord in the chat right now. If you want to network with people that are like-minded and you want to have access to all the different states and countries and everything else that we have there, maybe you should check it out, because I think networking right now is pretty important based on how crazy everything's actually getting, okay? So, Andrew Valenta, I'm your favorite YouTuber. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you for that. It could be completely different if we met in real life, but at least from this perspective, I'm doing all right. And I can really honestly say thank you for that, because this isn't always the easiest gig, and not everybody's as nice as you. In fact, there's a lot more people who are usually mean. So it takes a level of thick skin, as well as being honest about yourself too, because sometimes I understand that I have shortcomings. Now, what else happened? Well, we know what's going on in Eastern Europe, and we could talk about that ad nauseum anytime you want. But this past week, February 3rd, actually, We had an announcement from the Department of Defense. The Biden administration announces additional security assistance for Ukraine. This is not going away, and this is not something that we are going to just be able to shut off in the sense of being like a faucet, right? Coffee keeps me going. I don't always suggest everyone drink coffee at 9 o'clock at night, but this is what I do. Okay, today the Defense Department, and like I said, it's February 3rd. The Defense Department, or Department of Defense, whatever you want to call it, I guess, announces a significant new package of security assistance for Ukraine. This includes the authorization of a presidential drawdown of security assistance valued at up to $425 million, as well as $1.75 billion in Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative funds, which can just go wherever they end up going, I guess. But here's what they're saying. Additional ammunition for high mobility artillery rocket systems, or HIMARS, additional 155 millimeter artillery rounds, additional 120 millimeter mortar rounds, 190 heavy machine guns with thermal imagery sights and associated ammunition to counter unmanned aerial systems. I mean, I would take at least one of those. Can 189 go instead? 181 mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles, good old MRAPs, 250 Javelin anti-armor systems, which, by the way, we are depleting ourselves of Javelins, and they are not as easy to produce as everybody might think. So we are falling further and further behind in that production to use ratio. 2,000 anti-armor rockets, Claymore anti-personnel munitions, demolitions munitions, cold weather gear, helmets, and other field equipment. Under the USAI, the DoD will provide Ukraine with 2 Hawk air defense firing units, anti-aircraft guns and ammunition, equipment to integrate Western air defense launchers, missiles, and radars with Ukraine's air defense systems, equipment to sustain Ukraine's existing air defense capabilities, air defense generators, counter-unmanned aerial systems, 4 air surveillance radars, 20 counter-mortar radars, spare parts for counter-artillery radars, Puma unmanned aerial systems, precision-guided rockets, secure communications equipment, medical supplies, funding for training, maintenance, and sustainment. Okay, so I'm just going to throw this out there. Okay, I don't want anyone to mistake what I'm about to say, but it kind of sounds like we're at war. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm just some layman, but I look at this and I think, man, what are we sending to who? Because if that same report literally just said, we're supplying our troops with all this stuff, we would all read that and be like, yep, they need all that stuff, right? So I don't know how else to look at it at this point. Like, we're in war. We might not be officially at war. We might not be talking about it in the sense of the United States is at war with Russia, but like we're in a war, right? I mean, is that hard to just admit at this point? I feel like they just should. I mean, if we, the average people, are like, yeah, we're at war, and Russia is like, yeah, we're at war, and all these other countries, especially like apparently Germany, right, is like, yeah, we're at war. Are we just at war? Like, what? You know the answer. Okay. Grisio Nemo, how much of that will end up on the black market? Quite a bit, most likely. And I saw recently, and somebody I follow on Instagram, which I am actually on Instagram. I was like really just like not trying to do that for a very long time. But due to some of my close friends being on there and having those interactions, and then that kind of evolving into like a place to, have direct messaging and stuff like that, I started posting on there. So I am on Instagram if you want to find me over there, but same name, don't worry. But I will say that I follow Mr. Guns and Gear over there, and he was sharing a post of some, Iranian firearm, or no, not Iranian, Iraqi firearms that ended up on like the local classifieds page in that region. So it is interesting that these brand new guns that, somehow are just being sold on the aftermarket in Iraq are just showing up on classifieds pages. So yeah, these things do happen. Okay. Stevie's 333, just at war. That's all, right? Yeah, I like the way you presented that. No worries. Let's see. BWT or BW Tile Setter 777 subs. Prescott, Arizona. Sup all. Hey, one of my good friends, Ryan, over at Prescott Caliber Club. I'm pretty sure he's in Prescott, Arizona as well. So, but you reminded me of him, and he's a good guy. Now, Red Scout suggests everyone get out of the cities. I think if you can leave the city, obviously you would probably like to. And I understand why people maybe aren't just capable of doing that in like an immediate fashion, right? Is it a goal to set? Is it something you should try to plan for? I personally left the city, and I'm glad that I did. I understand it's not for everybody. So, if you can't leave or you just don't want to, that's fine. Just be aware of risk assessment and calculate what it is you're signing up for in the sense of what you could face in the future. Now, let's talk about Small Town 1776. I wonder if there's an Illuminati card for the card game. Well, if you don't know about the Illuminati card game, you should probably look it up because it's kind of weird, some of the stuff that's in that game, and very prophetic in many ways, especially regarding just a lot of stuff. So if you guys don't know about that, go ahead and check that on your own. I'm not going through that little tirade with you. Now, what else are we doing? Well, we already know we're increasing our support over there in Eastern Europe. So why not just start increasing it in other places too? Okay. So January 31st, U.S. to increase weapons deployment to counter North Korea. So U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin on Tuesday said that the United States will increase its deployment of advanced weapons such as fighter jets and bombers to the Korean Peninsula as it strengthens joint training and operational planning with South Korea in response to a growing North Korean nuclear threat. All right. So we are now also bumping up our support over in South Korea. And of course, we're moving on from this article to another region, which is in that same region, where there will be more support there as well. Now, if you wanted to, I don't know, let's just say activate your plans against the United States, probably, at least in my opinion, one of the best ways to do that successfully would be to make sure that our resources were spread too thin for you to necessarily stop an attack, right? So our resources are being spread all over the place at this point. They have been for quite some time, but now they're really being spread out, and they're just continually being spread out. So I'm very curious to see how this all works, because I don't think we could necessarily deal with the Eastern Front in Europe as well as dealing with the East in the sense of Asia at the same exact time. I think a lot of us have, speculated that for a while now, but it's starting to look like that's going to be what the situation is. And it's going to depend on whether or not China or Russia decides to do something directly at us, or, I guess, drawing us into something versus, one of our close allies or whoever else you want to talk about in the sense of NATO. But yeah, it looks like that's what's happening. So North Korea, of course, is ramping up their nuclear threats. North Korea is doing more tests. North Korea is doing North Korea things. And we are also going to be dealing with things in that region for quite some time. And I think that because of that, we know there's going to be more funding and more support going into that same area. So U.S. Marine units are taking position on key terrain around Taiwan as tensions rise with China. This happened on February 1st. Or this article came out on February 1st. And like I said, a lot of this stuff has been going on while this whole balloon thing was happening. And a lot of these stories weren't put to the front or analyzed in the same sense because there's so much excitement, I guess I would call it, and so much attention being paid to the balloon that maybe not everybody was aware of the fact that Marine units are taking positions on key terrain around Taiwan right now. And then we're over here saying, hey, China, get your balloon out of here. But if you want to look at it from a different perspective, which I always suggest doing, because if you can look through the eyes of your enemy, you might have a better understanding of what their next move will be, right? So look at this through China's eyes. Oh, the U.S. is really mad because we have a balloon over them right now. Well, that's interesting because the U.S. has Marine units taking position on key terrain all around what we consider to be our island. So, yeah. This isn't looking good. Like, this isn't how things get resolved. This isn't how peace comes, forward or anything like that. They have their balloon over us. We've got Marines on their island. I mean, that's how they view Taiwan. Regardless of what we say about it, we have Marines on a Chinese island in the eyes of China. So we have to keep all that stuff in mind, because the way the news reports and the way we talk about it, Taiwan's its own sovereign country that does their own thing, has a democratically elected president, all this kind of stuff, and we're their ally and we help them a lot. But in China's eyes, we literally have U.S. Marines in fortified positions on their own island. Yeah, I can see this not ending very well. The US and Japan said in January that a Marine Littoral Regiment will be set up in Japan by 2025. Okay. A Marine Littoral Regiment will also hold a major exercise in the northern Philippines this spring. These moves reflect the US's focus on being able to operate around the Pacific in a war with China, right? And we know that this whole thing is just positioning. We're putting people in the Philippines, we're putting people in Japan. We already have people in Taiwan. So all these things are happening, and we're basically, trying to shield Taiwan from China, and we're stationing troops and weaponry in these different, allied regions in the Philippines and Japan, as well as in Taiwan, to make sure that we're ready to go in case there is that actual invasion attempt. So a lot of this is happening right now, and yet everybody's confused as to why, you know, things didn't escalate more quickly when it came to the Chinese balloon. And I honestly think this is a big part of it, because you have to understand that there's probably a lot of different scenarios where China could justify shooting something of ours down as well, based on these situations unfolding right this second. All right. So all this was happening during the same time as this whole balloon situation, but I don't know, didn't talk about it very much. So I guess that's the best way to say that. Okay. Let's see here. Got some good people in the chat. Little Sai says we must start making chips here now. And I agree with that. And they are working on that. It's just that production is a difficult thing to just develop quickly. And the other thing to keep in mind about the chips, which we actually are about to be talking about here very soon, is that they require their own resources too. Like, you can't just set up a chip factory and just start producing chips. You still need the resources required to make the chips. And one of those resources that is used on a regular basis is silicone. And silicone is a derivative of sand. And there's actually a sand shortage. And I know that sounds crazy too, but it's true. So there's all these different facets coming into play as to why it's difficult to just start ramping up chip production here in the United States. Now, of course, we are trying, and I do hope that we're able to do that. But I do believe that it's going to be a lot more difficult than what we anticipate. All right. So let's see here. I want to go ahead and talk to you guys here for a second. So some random dude can't even get Frito chips. So I totally get that. And that is difficult. I think that's a big problem. Little Sai also says we need to make more meds here. And I agree with that as well, because what you have to understand is that China controls 90% of the APIs, or the active pharmaceutical ingredients. So because of that, they have a stranglehold on basically 90% of medicine. And that's not good. If we go to war with China, we suddenly don't have a lot of medicine. So there's a lot of leverage that China has over us, even if it's not military strength. Economic strength is often more valuable than military strength, depending on the situation. Because if China just cuts off the supply, what happens to America as a whole? And if America just collapses in on itself, well, then China already won. Maybe they didn't even have to do anything militarily, right? So these are all things we have to keep in mind. Let's see. Seiko Mag, how is the bunker project? Well, if I could build a legitimate bunker, I'd be very happy. But you know what? I'm just not capable of doing that right this second. The ground is very frozen, and it's not something I even necessarily have the necessary tools and equipment for. So I'm doing what I can with what I have. So I will be getting an above ground storm shelter, because I do have tornadic activity out here. And regardless of nuclear threat, that's still, hopefully, at least, maybe not at this point, but in the past has been more likely than dealing with a nuclear detonation. But there's ways that I could at least, let's just say, harden that structure to fallout. Maybe not a nuclear blast, but there are some things I'm considering doing as a project here on the channel that should be interesting. Otherwise, I will also be working on something that's below ground for the obvious detonation aspect of what we should be concerned about. Now, Northern Girl Hobbies, thank you for being here. Thanks for hanging out, and I appreciate you sticking around for as long as you could. So thank you so much. Now, let's see here. Real quick, I do need to mention that, yes, the channel's largest supporter is Midway USA. And I hope you guys understand that I was a customer of Midway USA for like a decade before they ever reached out to me and before we created this partnership. So it is a company that I supported anyway. And then the fact that they have all these different things like military surplus stuff and everything else really makes the partnership work well, because it gives me access to a lot of things that I might not have had access to otherwise. So I really appreciate them for supporting the channel. So I do need to mention that. And I appreciate you all understanding why moving forward with some of these partnerships is the way I can provide more content and provide more I don't know, value to everything that you guys support here. So thank you for that as well, because without your support, I wouldn't receive any outside support. I hope that makes sense. All right. Now, what is going on with semiconductors? Because I know that we just talked about microchips, right? And little Cy was right. I hope we can ramp up production of them here in the near future. Well, there's a lot of things to this microchip shortage that is actually going to be detrimental here for us in the United States. And I think that that's something that maybe people have skipped over, because it's not just about having access to the chips, but it's the snowball effect, right? This whole thing becomes a bigger and bigger problem because it touches more than just one aspect, right? Oh, we don't have enough semiconductors, so we can't make electronics or high-end technology. Dang, that sucks. Well, I agree. But what does that do to our economy in a way, right? That's what we really need to be considering. So let's talk about that, because this is from Ford. And this is what Ford is saying. Yes, the automaker Ford is talking about this right here, and that's what we're going to discuss, okay? Ford's quarter 4 earnings report is a mix of good and bad news. The car maker's fourth quarter generated a net income of $1.3 billion. If you believe that is a solid performance, here's the shocking bit. This is no more, no less than $11 billion lower than the same quarter of the previous year, okay? And this came out February 3rd. So this is more news that was going on during the balloon crisis that people maybe didn't pay attention to, but this is a really bad economic indicator, and also a reminder as to why this chip shortage is maybe more important than a lot of people think, okay? CEO Jim Farley admitted in the earnings report that Ford should have done much better in 2022, promising to invest particularly in execution and performance in 2023. Okay, this year the company expects to sell approximately 15 million vehicles in the United States and around 13 million vehicles in Europe. It hopes it can generate up to $11 billion in adjusted EBIT, earnings before interest and taxes. Farley, however, acknowledges that 2023 is going to be a challenging year. Despite improvements in terms of the supply chain, Ford believes a recession will cause particular problems in the United States and in Europe. The car maker also expects to higher industry-wide customer incentives to make the market more competitive, especially as car manufacturers manage to align production with demand. Now, hold on, we're getting to it, I promise. And I want you to really quick keep this in mind. The CEO of Ford says they believe the recession will cause particular problems in the United States and Europe, okay? So the CEO of Ford isn't confused as to whether or not we're going to be or are currently in a recession. Yet, honestly, if right this second you Google United States recession, right, 2023 recession, you'll get mixed reports of people saying that, well, the chances of a recession have gone down significantly, or we're not quite in a recession yet, but we're still possibly going to see that this year if things don't change, right? There's a lot of denial as to a recession occurring. But according to the CEO of Ford, the recession, however you want to read that, will be problematic in 2023, okay? All right, so the consensus right now is that the U.S. has a 65% chance to face a recession, but Goldman Sachs says the probability is much lower at 35%. Now, I wonder why a giant investment firm would have any kind of reasoning for wanting to say that the recession might not happen, right? I wonder why investors would want anyone to believe that we're not necessarily going to see a recession. No idea. The inflation level, which has skyrocketed in the last few months, fueled by the macroeconomic problems and the rising prices of materials, could eventually go negative thanks to the supply chain recovery. Ford expects the U.S. to deal with just a mild recession, with the impact to be heavier in Europe, where the company says a moderate downturn is very likely. The U.S. economy, and this is where this is all going, so this is like the important part I want you to pay attention to. The U.S. economy, however, is currently facing massive layoffs, especially in the technology sector, with giants like Google and Microsoft recently announcing that they are letting thousands of people go. No American car maker announced layoffs so far. Okay, leaving aside the bad news, Ford also tries to see the glass half full. The company says the chip shortage is going to become less of a headache this year, and given the cost of goods sold, including the materials it needs for vehicle manufacturing, it expects little to no disruption in vehicle manufacturing. Now, here's a couple things you need to keep in mind. First off, these layoffs are what you really need to be considering when it comes to this shortage and when it comes to our economy as a whole. The other thing I want to just mention really quickly is that it's easy to say that you'll have less of a headache this year meeting demand when you missed your goals of sales by so much last year. They must have so many new vehicles from 2022 that they could sell this year as new that they don't need to worry about their supply as much, right? You don't just lose that inventory. It's still there. So keep that in mind. It's very easy to say things should be a little easier this year because basically we didn't have the demand we thought we would have, and now we have the supply, right? That doesn't necessarily change the supply chain. That doesn't necessarily change the chip shortage. It just means that what they were able to produce didn't sell, so they have more now, which can be sold later on. But the thing I really wanted to focus on was this job situation, okay? No American car maker announced layoffs so far, but missing their sales goal in quarter 4 of 2022 by $11 billion is a big deal. And understand that we are going to see many, many layoffs here in the United States. And this is going to hurt our cost of living. This is going to hurt our quality of life. This is going to hurt everything because our country is not able to sustain the population at this point in time based on the economy. And that was all caused very much in part by 2020. And we're still seeing the ramifications of that. Now, why is this such an issue? Well, understand that the jobs report is problematic as well. I hope you guys know, one of the places I get some of my information is from the Epic Times. And they do a good job of reporting stuff. You know, I've seen some good stories come out from them, and I reference them pretty regularly just because they have some good information. But one thing that's cool about the Epic Times is that they've reached out to me multiple times for my input on different events or preparedness or things related to that. So I appreciate that. So I just wanted to mention that because I think it's cool that, you know, the Epic Times is willing to talk to a guy like myself to just say, hey, what are your thoughts on this situation? And I appreciate that they're willing to talk to the regular person and someone who's a prepper because maybe we have a different perspective as to what's happening. So that gives me at least some confidence in what they do in the sense of reporting because they're at least getting out there and trying to talk to people who are in the community and worried about the things that they're reporting on, right? So without seasonal adjustment, the U.S. economy actually lost 2.5 million jobs, not gained 517,000. So, of course, the media and the government likes to put a spin on job reporting on a regular basis. And the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reported on February 3rd, another thing that came out while the balloon was in the air, I'm just throwing that out there, that the economy added 517,000 new jobs in January. But that was with seasonal adjustment, based on the fact that generally after Christmas, you see mass layoffs in the sense of temporary workers and everything else. Unfortunately, temporary employment is going to the wayside and in fact hasn't been the same as it has been since 2020 when temporary jobs just basically didn't exist because non-essential workers would very much likely be considered what the temporary workers were. So because of this adjustment, you could just be like, yeah, look, we added all these jobs. But in reality, relying on that seasonal adjustment to be able to say we added 517,000 jobs just made something look good that was actually bad. And what we actually lost was 2.5 million jobs. Okay. And even if a lot of those were temporary, those jobs aren't coming back. And people aren't going to just suddenly have those jobs again. So we needed to at least be prepared for a very difficult economic downturn here in the United States, which we are already facing. I know it, you know it. You pay your bills and you know it. You pay your grocery bill and you know it. You pay your utilities bills and you know it. But a lot of people are still in denial. And regardless of how you prepare for that downturn, just be aware of the fact that your life will probably be more difficult or at the minimum less luxurious in the near future. Okay. And, you know, do what you can. There's a lot of ways to approach it, right? And I'm not a financial advisor, so I'm not going to tell you what I think you should or should not do. But what I will say is that prepping helps with that a lot, no matter what, because one day you might have to open that bucket of food that you didn't plan on opening unless it was an SHTF scenario, right? But here we are, broke, but still fed. And honestly, that's good enough for me in the sense of being a prepper. Like if I have to eat food that I prepped because I just can't afford food right that minute, that's worth prepping, right? So just keep that in mind, okay? Now, hopefully at this point, we've discussed quite a few things that had to do with, let's just say, distraction-related events, okay? Things that have been happening while that balloon was in the air and took our eyes off of some of the other things occurring. And the first story we discussed tonight, I wanted to just make sure we revisited really quickly, right? We have detainees from Guantanamo Bay being released in Central America, and then we have people crossing the border illegally in the South that are being detained, possibly on the terror watch list, right? So understand how those dangerous different situations can develop over time, and understand how many people have crossed that border that we don't know about that might already be involved with those types of situations. Okay. So I just wanted to mention that. James A, thank you for the super chat. I really appreciate it. I also want to mention I do have a subscribe star. It is kind of like Patreon, but it doesn't have all of the same restrictions that Patreon has. However, I have heard that there are some issues with people getting memberships or renewing and stuff like that. So I'm looking into that. So if you're having issues with Subscribestar, please reach out to me via Discord, or you can send me an email, magicprepper@gmail.com. Whatever you want to do. Just if you're having issues, give me a heads up. And if you just want to check it out, make sure you do. I posted a link to a shorts video on there that I made that I thought was kind of stupid, but also fun. So if you guys want to see that, that's where it's at. I'm putting some exclusive content over there, but it's more the casual stuff because that's where I like to just hang out with everybody. You can direct communicate with me on there if you want. It's $5 a month, and there are some cool incentives as well. I just sent somebody a Sawyer Mini and a couple of water purification tablets just to, as a thank you and for being part of the community. And then there's also some cool like swag coming out. I am getting some cool morale patches put together because it's like a members only thing. I'm trying to make it legit. I'm trying to see the best way I can do that. And then who knows? It might be the platform where we can maintain communication if YouTube ever decides the things that I do over here might not be welcome anymore. Because if you don't realize this and you're not maybe into like the firearm stuff, there's been quite the purge of firearms creators here on YouTube. And I don't know if you follow New York Prepper or not, but he and I chat every so often because he's a nice, good dude. And New York Prepper, like his channel was gone for like a week because of some of his firearms content. So it happens to preppers too, not just gun tubers, right? So keep that in mind. Let's see, Cat Lady Homestead 23, meow. Hello, Magic Prepper, and everyone in the chat. Well, hello to you as well, and thank you for being here, and thank you for letting me meow on live stream without, it being my fault, because, sometimes I just want to meow and I'm not able to because I don't really have a reason to. James Brandon, I'm 25, feel like my life future is being taken. Well, don't feel like that. Here's what I'd say to you, James, and this is something I want you to consider. You're 25 right now, which like in many ways you could look at as being like peak prime health. Like you could be maybe like your most physical capability right now at 25 years old. And maybe that's, fate. Maybe that is timing. Maybe that is for a reason so that you can be at your best during a critical situation. So keep that in mind. Okay. That's what I want to say. All right. Now, let's see here. Well, let's go ahead and talk about some of the things that have happened since the balloon that are all relevant to what's going on, because we still need to prepare. And this story has things that we have to discuss. Okay. So, the FBI arrests woman with extremist views and alleged power grid attack plot targeting 5 substations. So there's a lot of things we can take away from this. A lot of things, okay? Here's what I want to mention, all right? These two were arrested. They had plans to attack 5 substations in Maryland, and their whole goal was to basically take down Baltimore. And their thought process, apparently, from what I've read, is that they would be able to disrupt power to that entire municipality. And then they know the ensuing chaos in a place like Baltimore would be hard to come back from, right? So this happened. Now, of course, we don't want these things to occur. I don't want my power to go out. You don't want your power to go out, okay? But then you have to also apply your logic to some of these conversations to understand that there's more to this story, and there's also a lot of attention being paid to some of the things that are asinine, and then you have to understand there might be more reasons behind why these things are happening, right? Okay, so either way, if these people were planning to do this thing and they got caught, that's probably for the better, because I don't want to see power go out, and I don't think anybody, especially innocent people, should suffer through a power outage, especially in a city as dangerous as Baltimore. Because let's be honest, Baltimore is a relatively dangerous city. It's one of our major cities that has seen better days, let's just say, okay? The FBI and U.S. Attorney's Office officials in Baltimore announced they had arrested 2 individuals, a man and a woman with extremist views, who are allegedly attempting to attack the power grid in Maryland. These critical infrastructure attacks are going to keep happening, regardless of who's at fault or their views or their motives or any of that stuff. Keep in mind, no matter what, you can talk about inside jobs, you can talk about foreign adversaries, you can talk about, terrorist attacks or whatever you want to talk about. These things are going to happen. I'm telling you that right now. You be prepared for grid down, even if it's localized. Moore County, North Carolina, well, it's pretty close to a military base, but if you lived there, I don't think you would have thought you were at the same threat level as people living in a major city like Baltimore. But it can happen anywhere at any time. So please keep this in mind. Now, look, we've got emphasis being put on the firearms. We've got emphasis being put on the ammunition. Okay. We have emphasis on the fact that this person is a neo, you know what, because that is one thing that I don't want to necessarily play around with talking about here, especially when you know how people feel about pro Second Amendment types anyway, right? Either way, okay, because I want to keep this live stream up and running. That's just something I like to do. Here's something I thought was very interesting. A close-up shot of an EOTech, because this is something you need to be aware of them using to do these terrible crimes. This is where my mind starts to veer off from the official story. And I start looking at this and saying, why are we paying so much attention to this? What's the purpose here? And then, of course, you know what some of the purpose here is, okay? But yes, a photo of equipment included in the FBI affidavit outlining allegations against this person, because I don't even want to say their names, because if these are the things they were trying to accomplish, they're not good people. Both are charged with conspiracy to destroy an energy facility, right? So somehow this EOTech is part of the equation. I just want you to be aware that they're putting a lot of emphasis on the firearms and the accessories used in these attacks. And then here's the other thing you have to keep in mind. See, we have another photo here with, you know, a scoped rifle of some sort, which, you know, of course, that's part of the equation that they're trying to talk about as well. So, and for all the, like, I'm not going to say, you know, the FUDs out there, because that's like kind of, I don't know. That's just not how I roll, really. But what I want to say is for all the guys out there who think that all you need is a bolt action, and that your bolt action is going to be protected from any kind of Second Amendment infringements in the future, because, you know, it's a bolt action, right? I don't think bolt actions are going to be safe from a lot of this stuff they're trying to accomplish here in our government for a long time. I want you to understand that this whole sniper rifle thing is going to turn into something at some point. I guarantee you, because they're going to try to do whatever they can to take whatever they can. They don't care what it is. They don't care if it's semi-automatic. They don't care if it's a bolt action. They don't care if it's a pump action. They don't care. They're just going to take what they can, and they're going to use evidence like what they have here to say, these are the reasons why we shouldn't have these weapons of war on the streets, because you know what are used in war? Sniper rifles, right? What's a sniper rifle? Well, generally a bolt action rifle with a high-powered optic on it. Well, that's a problem. We can't have those, especially when people are using them to attack the power grid. So just keep in mind, these people are probably terrible people, and if this is what they were planning, this is not good, okay? And according to everything said about them, I would just say that they're terrible people, but I also take everything with a grain of salt when it comes to mainstream media reporting, because obvious reasons, I guess, right? But keep that in mind, okay? Now, I'm looking at everybody here in the chat for a second. Oki Khan, really like the EOTech makes a crap. Yeah, exactly. It's a holographic sight, right? Anyone, I mean, this is one thing I will give credit to the FUDs for, right? Yeah, you can do the same thing with iron sights for what it is they were trying to do. You're right. So yeah, the EOTech has nothing to do with it at all, but it's got a lot of focus being paid attention to it, and that's what leaves me thinking that this is problematic, because even if everything in the story is 100% accurate, which I don't have any evidence to say otherwise, there's a lot of things being talked about that have no real reason to be talked about because they don't add anything to the story. So that should tell you that there's more to what the story is trying to accomplish rather than just giving you the facts, right? I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Now, we also had a devastating situation occur in Turkey. So I thought everyone should just at least be aware of that, okay? Look, the latest developments in Turkey right now is that over 3,800 people have died in this earthquake, which is insane. So look, I'm not here to talk about a lot in regards to the earthquake itself. What I want to say is that this can still just happen, okay? As preppers, when it comes to emergency preparedness, you know, natural disasters is one of our top threats when it comes to what could take us out in the sense of, you know, where you are, right? We all have natural disasters we face, whether or not it's the ice storm in Texas, right, which has knocked power out for like hundreds of thousands of people, which, by the way, has been an issue there, which was another story that wasn't really discussed based on this balloon scenario. But yeah, Texas has had a lot of problems with the power and this ice storm that went through, and yet I don't see a lot of discussion about it. You know why? Because everyone's talking about the balloon. But this earthquake is a good reminder that a natural event can, kill 3,800 people, which is insane. And search teams have rescued 2,500 people in the debris. That's a lot of people are affected by this massive earthquake. And there was 2 earthquakes total. But I wanted to mention this because in case you weren't aware of it, this happened. I mean, buildings are down. It's mass destruction. It's insanity. Okay. And this can happen in California. This can happen in the United States in general, right? We know this can happen. So just keep this in mind, because as much as we prepare for things like World War III, as much as we prepare for things regarding domestic issues here in the United States, as much as we prepare in general, the natural disasters are still always there, no matter what is happening. They can just spawn up out of nowhere and cause mass havoc for you and yours. So it's for all the people who are out there that like to talk about things in the sense of nothing's going to happen, okay? They always kind of relay that to SHTF, right? They relay it to World War III. They relay it to, some type of Armageddon type situation, which, by the way, can happen via natural disaster. So for everyone who thinks nothing's going to happen because they're seeing it from the lens of, Russia, Ukraine, or China, Taiwan, or any of those things that are occurring right now, well, okay, but then what about just a natural disaster? Because that can just happen, and it just happened in Turkey, and it's happening in Texas, and it's happening all the time everywhere. Wildfires, earthquakes, tsunamis, these things just happen. So regardless of the existential threats of war or foreign involvement when it comes to our domestic issues here in the United States, okay, fine. You don't think that stuff's going to happen? That's fine. Whatever. If you feel that way, that's fine. And do I think those things are going to happen? I mean, I think there's a probability at this point, whereas it used to be a possibility, right? But even if it doesn't happen, great. That's what I prefer. I don't want these things to happen. But I will say, inevitably and guaranteed, a natural disaster will happen. It will happen somewhere. And at some point in time, over the next 10 million years, it'll happen where you are right now, right? Because that's just how nature works. Things just happen at some point. So, yeah, is Yellowstone going to erupt one day? Yeah. Okay. Is California going to fall off into the Pacific Ocean? Probably. Like, these things are going to happen. So regardless of how you feel about any of the other stuff happening in the world, the earthquake in Turkey and Syria should remind you that it can just happen via natural disaster as well. Guess what? CME can happen just as easily as an EMP. And in fact, a high-powered CME is more likely to do more damage than a man-made EMP, because the sun is an insanely strong thing. It's not just like, weak sauce out there in the solar system, right? So that's just what I wanted to mention about that. And that's why I wanted to bring up the earthquake, because first off, it's a tragedy. 4,000 people have died. I mean, that's crazy for a natural disaster, right? And second off, it's a reminder that prepping isn't always just about these crazy things that are happening. Sometimes it's just about the natural disaster, which is why I'm getting an above ground shelter for tornadoes, because I don't have a basement. And I know that sounds crazy. Matt, how the heck could you move to missile silo territory and buy a house that doesn't have a basement? And it's called circumstance, right? Oh, I could have bought a house with a basement, but I would have had like 2 acres. Instead, I bought a house that didn't have a basement, and I have over 20 acres, right? So these are things that you have to compromise on, because especially when you don't have cash flat out to just buy a house, you also have to deal with qualifications, proximity to income, and all the other things that you're restricted on. So, you don't always get everything you want, especially when you buy something like a house. And that's just how it goes. So am I working on things in the future to try to alleviate that problem? Yeah, of course. Am I going to try my best to have a solution to some type of fallout or even nuclear detonation type scenario? I mean, yeah, I'm a prepper. I'm constantly considering those things, right? But in the words of, Teddy Roosevelt, do the best you can with what you have where you are. And that's exactly what I'm always going to have to do. So let's see here. I don't know what the I don't know what the context is here, but Jeff W says a little common sense would tell you that nobody is using an earthquake as a weapon against Turkey. Just a little. Yeah, I mean, I guess. And look, do I think that weather could be manipulated and things like earthquakes could be created by man? Of course they could. I mean, it's Russia has a Poseidon missile or the Poseidon torpedo that can create the gigantic radioactive tsunami, right? So a man-made natural disaster. These things could happen, right? But in general, natural disasters are probably just that. They're just natural. These things just happen. Okay. If it was a weapon, we'll probably never know. So either way, it doesn't matter because this earthquake happened and these people are suffering, right? And that's exactly what we have to look at it through in the lens of preparedness. And I think that's where we can get lost sometimes is like, everybody was concerned about what the balloon could be or what the balloon could do or what we're doing about the balloon, right? But the thought process there, which I was trying to convey in my last video, was we should be considering, what the balloon means for us in our preparedness. And when we consider that, what does it mean? It means that a foreign adversary was able to place something right above our heads that could easily contain a weapon. It means that maybe our military isn't as ready as we thought they were or willing as we thought they were. And it means that depending on scenario, these things might be happening on a regular basis or might already be in position. And all anyone has to do is flip the switch and lights out, right? So did it maybe make me consider an EMP as being a more probable scenario now? I mean, a little bit probably because of the altitude that this device or this airship was at and the fact that we know that these are weapons that China has a big investment in because a EMP is a lot more useful than a strategic nuke in many ways and a lot less expensive because the limited nuclear arsenal China has would likely be more effective used as an EMP rather than as an actual detonation on the ground or in the air above, a military target or even a metropolitan area. So those things all come to mind. And I think, okay, well, I guess we should consider that. And now, in case everybody was wondering, okay, the balloon, right? I specifically titled my last video Airship. And the reason I did that, and I think that this is something I want you guys to consider, okay? China called it an airship. Okay, not we didn't. China did. China said it was in a civilian airship. We called it a balloon. But there's a difference between an airship and a balloon. An airship or a dirigible is able to be directed, right? An airship can be maneuvered. A balloon is generally much more limited in its capacity to maneuver. So China called it what it was, which was an airship, not a balloon. Okay. So keep in mind that an airship is much more capable of doing much more nefarious things than a balloon. And that's why I wanted to make sure I named it what it was and at least what the people who owned it called it. And us calling it a balloon almost goes back to the conversation about propaganda, right? Where you call it a balloon because that's less of a threat in people's minds than an airship. An airship, for some people, could be a fighter jet, right? Because they don't think of things in terms of airships are historically related to dirigibles or blimps, right? And balloons are generally thought of as being like legitimately like a balloon, like a hot air balloon. So they use the terminology on purpose for reasons. And I think that you should keep that in mind because China called it what it was, and that's why I called it what it was. And I think that the balloon aspect of the conversation was actually part of that information they wanted you to have versus discussing the fact that this was an airship. Because as an airship, it would allude to the idea that this airship could be controlled or even manned. And if an airship, in the sense of an airplane, would have been in our skies, would the reaction have been different or would it have been the same reaction? And it's possible that the use of the term balloon was included in order to make you more understanding as to why we didn't react to it versus saying it's an airship, which gives everybody the thought that it could be, for all we know, like a bomber, right? And don't forget, Zeppelins were used in war multiple times and very effectively to bomb. And that's what they did, okay? So there's reasons why words are used. Okay, semantics are important. Now, um, let's see. Mr. Nobody says subsurface mapping. Yeah, it's possible. We don't know what kind of sensors they had on it. I mean, I guess the military probably does at this point, but yeah, there's a lot of interesting things that could come from that, right? And something else to consider is that it could have literally been doing nothing. It could have been doing absolutely nothing, and all it could have been is just a probing mission, right? Let's just see what happens if this balloon floats over there. Oh, what will they do? What will we do? How will things go? We don't know. So, man, there's a lot of different ways this thing could have gone. Okay. And not to mention, it is China. So they reverse engineer and they replicate very well. And who knows if it's a message as well. And when I say a message, what I mean is, okay, they know that this balloon is going to get taken out at some point. They know it's going to be retrieved at some point. So do you put things on the balloon to either mislead the people who acquire the equipment afterward, or do you put things on the balloon to make yourself look more capable than you really are based on the equipment that was found within said balloon, right? If this crazy high-tech stuff that maybe we don't even have was found on this balloon, how does that change our strategy based on what China has capable equipment for? This is just all I'm throwing out there, all right? And I enjoy these types of conversations because I think that this speculation and this kind of thought exercise is something that we should do as preppers, because it kind of forces you to overanalyze a situation in a way that might present certain solutions you wouldn't have had thought of before, right? It's kind of why I like doing strategy games. Strategy games are good because basically it keeps my mind sharp, and it forces me to find like solutions or alternative methods of winning the game versus something as straightforward as red versus black, right? So not that I play roulette or anything like that. Don't worry about that. All right, now South Florida DCL says maybe they're just testing JB, and that's possible too. Now, something I do want everyone to remember, and this is important, okay? And look, I try to remain as apolitical as I can. You can't about certain things, right? You can't because Second Amendment rights. Generally, you can't be too apolitical about that. But in this situation, I can be very apolitical. So that's why I wanted to mention that. But here's something you have to remember. Historically, at least, in recent history, both parties have their share of war hawks. Both parties have demonstrated a desire to be involved in conflict, right? So I don't think there's any reason to think that the current administration wouldn't want to engage in some type of kinetic situation any more so than any other administration. And don't forget who was in charge during things like Benghazi, right? During things related to SEAL Team 6 and all that stuff. I don't know. I'm just saying that there's a lot of stuff that happens under any party that seems to be in charge at the time. I guess that's what I'm going to say about it. Okay. Now, law of the minimum. What time this started? We started at 8:30 Central Standard Time. So if you just made it, I'm sorry, but you can watch the replay, and I appreciate you being here either way. Let's see. Ex-Conism says they want to get rid of body armor too. Now, we've seen that a few times, and we know that's going to keep going. And that photo of those two people that were arrested plotting the power grid attack, one of them was wearing a plate carrier. So, yeah, like I said, the optics matter as well. It's not always just about what's in the story, but the optics and the way the story is presented can kind of show you why some of these things are being pushed to the forefront, right? And that's just my thought process anyway. So if any of you have anything for me, you can always go to magicprepper.com. If you want to follow me on Instagram, you can, because I have a good time over there sometimes. If you guys want to check me out on Subscribestar, I'm having a good time over there, but we did have some issues. So if you try to join and you have issues, just message me on Discord or on through my email, because I want to try to fix that. Try my best here. The reason I moved over to there from Patreon is because I wanted more flexibility when it came to certain types of content. I wanted more flexibility when it came to things like giveaways, and I wanted more flexibility in general. And Patreon also had some weird issues back in the fall of 2022 that made me second guess whether or not I wanted to be part of that platform. So I'm still kind of trying to figure that out. But at the same time, if Subscribestar decides it just won't work, then I don't know what I'll do next. So we're just doing what we can. And look, no one's required to do these things. Like important stuff, I guarantee I post on YouTube. But there are people who have specifically asked me for ways to support what I do over here. So I'm trying my best to provide that platform for those people, and then also provide them with additional value for supporting me, not just, supporting me financially without anything in return, basically, is what I'm trying to say. So I appreciate all of you that do these things. Keto Homestead with Jess, amazing chat and live as always. That you so much at Magic Prepper. I'm not good at reading emojis, I guess. So, but Prepper Now is being held up by me. So thank you guys all so much. Thank you for being here. If you have anything else for me at all, you know what to do. And besides that, that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.